Howdy y'all, I'm IceGold, and today I'll be going over my ranking of all 12 counter matchups that exist in Wizard101 PvP. Game design, as of late, has sort of added these with the Rochambeau wheel. It's sort of like a rock, paper, scissors type deal, but basically every school has 2 schools that they counter, and then 2 schools that counter them. One on each wheel, being elemental and spirit. I know I'm not very high ranked just yet, but this is my interpretation based on what I have played and what I've seen. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoy, and let's go on to the video. So coming in dead last in the 12th spot is going to be Storm versus Life. Now, this matchup effectively takes what we know about Rochambeau and basically just throws it out the window. Storm is actually supposed to counter Life on the wheel, and spells like, Triton, those are good for countering heal overtimes and setting up a powerful counterattack, until you realize all Life has to do is use Banshee to turn those plus 55% blades into 25% weaknesses, and infections, limiting the Storm's ability to hit as well as heal. So basically, one card that a Life Wizard can just click really slows down both aspects of Storm's identity, being hitting and healing. Because the Triton card, for those unaware, does a little bit of damage, not a whole lot, but it does some, and then it'll clear a protected heal over time, and then give the caster 2 55% chromatic blades. And then Banshee, of course, deletes 2 of those, and turns them into chromatic, 25 weaknesses, and infections. So that's real fun. And to that end, it is very easy for Life to outdamage a Storm, as they have much higher health and resist and can genuinely take better trades despite being the quote-unquote countered school. And honestly, it's like scissors beating rock.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot! Yes!
Scissors cuts rock.
Oh man, how come you always win?
My rating of this matchup, where Storm is supposed to counter Life, is a likely victory, or approximately 65 wins out of 100 for the Life Wizard, just because of the sheer stat and counter diffs. Storm can still win if the Life doesn't reliably pull Banshee, but it's unlikely. So coming in 11th place is going to be Death versus Life, and while this one is much closer, with how Regenerate currently works, I can say with confidence that a Life will beat a Death probably 55 to 60 out of 100 times. The Death really has to be on top of their threefold in Doom game, and the Life has to deck fail quite a bit in terms of curse counters and sanctuaries. And then additionally, one of Death's strongest and most valuable hits is its Scion, which does a lot of damage and then drains half of that back to health on the caster. And while that's great against most schools, it's insane amounts of value, the Death really needs to leverage their infections on the Life well to keep them from healing off their entire gambit with one card that costs 5 pips, as opposed to their 9 pip Scion. But with how Scion works, it removes those infections to meet the damage conditional. Death is much more sustainable than Storm in this matchup, but if you ask me, I'd say my rating of this matchup, where Death is supposed to counter Life, is a lean victory, or, as aforementioned, 55 to 60 wins out of 100 for the Life Wizard. It's very easy for the Life to fumble, but they have much more room to mess up compared to the Death. So these are the only 2 quote-unquote counter matchups where the school that is supposed to get countered is the one that usually comes out on top, just due to stat differences and how their cards work. Coming in 10th, we have Fire versus Ice. Now on paper, Fire should just sweep Ice without question. They have all of the shield counters. Setting up their own gambits can be extremely easy if the Ice is unprepared. And then, they have extremely high Pierce versus Ice being a resist school, etc. But the stat difference is still a massive problem for Fire at the moment. Because, Fire may have insane Pierce, but Ice still has the highest resist in the game. And they are certainly still competitive against Fire because of that. I am on Test Realm using a different little setup, but on live, I have 81 Fire res without any warding going on. So, that is still a good 25-ish higher than Fire's Pierce cap. If the Ice plays well enough, they can match the Fire's pace and then just win off of the stat differences. My rating of this matchup, where Fire is supposed to counter Ice, is a toss-up, or both schools getting 50 wins out of 100 against the other. It's really anyone's game. with this. Skill does come into play with these, but because of how stats work, a good ice can beat a good fire the same amount of times as vice versa. Coming in 9th, we have Storm versus Fire, and to absolutely no one's surprise, Storm's counter matchups don't even land in the top 8, all because of stats. Storm's identity as an overtime countering school should just beat down on Fire, but all Fire has to do is play vaguely like a Storm by setting up buffs and taking better trades because of, yet again, stats. Standard Fire Pierce can go right through Standard Storm Resist, so if a Fire strikes against a Storm, you can consider that to be game over due to the extra 1,000 health that Fires have, and how shielding does not even come close to saving the Storm. That being said, Storm's healing identity lets them stay afloat, so if the Storm is able to stay on top of their defense and heals and the Fire isn't countering those, then the Storm can just as easily out-tank the Fire, as crazy as that sounds. My rating of this matchup where Storm is supposed to counter Fire is a toss-up, meaning I think both schools can get 50 wins on each other out of 100. These two are the most volatile schools right now, each having low resist and high damage, so whoever uses their utility better typically comes out on top. In 8th place, we have Ice versus Storm. Now, Ice just fundamentally struggles with healing schools, especially protected heals since Snowdrift doesn't steal those, so enough berry spam on a Storm with the right amount of shads throw-in can certainly net the Storm a win. That said though, it just goes back to how stats work. The difference in base resist with no pins involved is around 30, and the pierce difference is only around 10, so you can kind of see where that leads. I mean, I have a pin on, so that makes it about 40, which is wild. With Ice's innate ability to counter blades, along with, you know, Banshee's prevalence, being just a hard counter to charm gambits and all that, Storm struggles with doing a lot of burst damage, which is its main identity, so it basically just becomes a war of attrition. Storm's healing versus Ice's resist. And if the Ice stays on top of the counters, you know, Skeletal Pirate especially, since that's 2 50 shields that the Storm then has to deal with, then the Ice can easily come out ahead. And it's funny that Storm does better in a matchup where they're getting countered compared to the matches where they're the counter. My rating of this matchup where Ice is supposed to counter Storm is a tilt victory, or 51-ish out of 100 wins for the Ice. If the stats were a bit different, this might have moved back down to a toss-up, but for now I'll give Ice the slightest possible edge in this matchup. Rounding out the bottom half, we have Fire versus Myth, and at the moment, these two schools are very focused on overtimes, with both dueling into the other, so it's sort of on the Fire to use their own trap counters better since they have an easier time handling traps compared to the Myth. That, combined with slightly higher DPP, allows Fire to just barely pull ahead, but they do still have to stay on their toes and do their best to avoid and mitigate Divim. My rating of this matchup where Fire is supposed to counter Myth is a tilt victory, or 51-ish out of 100 wins for the Fire. Most of it comes down to copy limits and whether or not the Myth has a Fire Mastery for easy air access, as well as Fire being able to use pure overtimes better than Myth can for better chip damage. So that is the last of the swing matchups where, you know, either school can reasonably beat the other. So, as you could tell, it's kind of just all downhill from here. Number 6 is Myth versus Ice, and currently Myth has a bit of an edge over Ice because Ice does not possess the counter tools that Fire does for them, and Ices have to pack a lot of Krakens, either in main or inside, but I pack them inside, and that's to avoid Divim, and then trap counters aren't exactly our specialty. The stat differences do favor Ice, and it's definitely possible for the Ice to win, especially with a lot of Frostbite spam as well as Weaver, but Myth is just good at countering no matter how you play. Want to go for Scion? Betrayal into the Minotaur. Think about a Jhin, Delusion into the Stone Colossus. Maybe an Oni? Reversal into the Divim. You don't win. Ice is good at being on guard against a Myth, but it's hard to argue with not being able to set up a Gambit. As we always used to say back in the day, when in doubt, Weaver it out. And that's really effectively the only way to beat a Myth as an Ice. My personal rating of this matchup where Myth is supposed to counter Ice is a likely victory, or 60 to 70 wins out of 100 for the Myth. And I would probably move this to the safe category if Ice didn't have so much resist. I mean, goddamn, look at that. Coming in 5th, we have Ice versus Death, and if Ice was a bit better at countering shields, this would be a much safer matchup, because Blighthound's existence sort of makes this one a no-brainer. Ice's biggest struggle is burst damage, so when we can use a spell with 890 base, at max tier that is, when we have a threefold on us, which doesn't even clear the threefold, so we can really just keep spamming it as much as we want. That is extremely powerful, and we can very easily use it to pressure death into not using their curse spells, like threefold. And this, coupled with Banshee's existence, allows Ice to completely lock death out of 2 of their 3 gambits, and the only remaining one costs 11 pips, so it can be hard to leverage. Additionally, there's the matter of Jin's Vexation being able to very easily set up Ice's own Jin, which can effectively fix Ice's biggest pitfall. And you see I packed 6 of these because these into, you know, an Iceberg Jin, that's pretty solid. To me, this is not so much a counter matchup as it is a matchup where Ice's biggest problem does not exist. And the biggest problem obviously being quick damage. My rating of this matchup, where Ice is supposed to counter death, is a safe victory, or approximately 75 wins out of 100 for the Ice. A well-timed buff to Doom Oni can still do mass, but this is the one matchup where Ice can really get ahead and gain too much value for the death to be able to recover if the Ice plays well in the early game. Coming in 4th place, we have Myth versus Death, and this is a similar situation to Ice versus Death, where Myth just completely shuts down 2 of Death's gambits. Oni is out of the picture 9 times out of 10 because Tri-Shields lead to Betrayal, which could lead to a Scion, and Death can have a hard time getting rid of those traps. Scion is also out of the picture most of the time because of Delusion for the same reason, and an open Stone Colossus can create a lot of pressure with the overtime as well. This gets above Ice though because Death's final gambit, being their Blade Gambit Macabre Jin, can just get hard countered by everybody's favorite spell, Earthquake. It's usually not as worth to Earthquake a Death because you can get rid of your own traps and lose leverage, but sometimes countering a gambit can take precedence, because you could be about to die, you know, you know how it goes. So having the option to Earthquake is very helpful. My rating in this matchup, where Myth is supposed to counter death, is a safe victory, or approximately 85 wins out of 100 for the Myth. It would genuinely take a lot of deck failing on the Myth's part for a death to get a gambit off, so that's why this matchup is so safe. Death can also just strike Poison Wraith and gain a ton of value, but that's a lot of cards to pull, and it can come at the cost of cycling important cards in main. Kicking off the top 3, we have Death versus Storm, and you know, stat differences aside, this is one of the most one-sided matchups in the entire game, because not only do Death's threefolds keep a Storm from healing, but they can set up all 3 of their gambits and counter Storm's gambits with added benefits. Scion, Banshee, now they're weakened and their heals aren't as good, plus you set up your own Scion in 1 turn. Jin, Pirate, now they can't send a hit. Oni, Vexation Spam, now you've got your own gambit set up. Storm just simply cannot keep up with Death, and even with Ward it's still very one-sided. And there's really not much a Storm can do except pack threefolds and Vexations and try their very hardest to brute force an Oni and Shrike. My rating in this matchup, where Death is supposed to counter Storm, is a safe victory, or approximately 90 wins out of 100 for the Death. I genuinely don't see any way for Storm to win this consistently. Their Shads are sort of their only saving grace, and even then, y'all already know Storm Shads are really not that great to begin with, but with how stats are, I wouldn't expect a Storm to pull it off all that easily. It's just a rough matchup, but an Oni and Shrike could certainly put in work. Oh boy, top 2. You know, there's only 2 left, and there's one school that you haven't heard much about in a long time. So, yep, 2nd place, Life versus Myth. Wow. Who would have thought that Life's counter matchups would be top 2? Never would have seen that coming. Anyway, it's no secret that Life is just a menace against traps and overtimes, which are the 2 big things Myth and Fire specialize in. The thing about Life, though, is that they have much more health and are not punished as heavily for any misplays they might make. They can survive double buffed crit gambits in Shrike, and just click regenerate, and you better pray you pip conserve into a 5-pip kill shot or something. Versus Myth in particular, they can just counter every single gambit you could think about setting up and just gain more value out of it. They have cards in their arsenal that can set up all 3 of their gambits in 1 turn if the conditions are met. If you try to stack Myth Fuels, Reversals, Betrayals, etc., they'll just Centaur and boom, they have a Primal Oni set up. Divum, they just Earthwalker, and now you're looking at a Jin. Trap stacking could either lead to setting up an Oni with Naturalism, or they could Leprechaun off 2 of the traps for heal overtimes, and now they have a Scion. Never seen that happen, but if a Life wanted to do that, they absolutely could. Point is, they gain power and remove yours at the same time, which is extremely hard to deal with when you're on a school with less resistance. It's nearly impossible to set up your own gambit as a myth without the life countering and then setting up their own gambit quicker than you. You want a Scion? They Centaur into Oni. Jin? They Earthquake you around your strike. Oni? Earthwalker into Jin. If they're protected, if you somehow, like have 2 Dibums on them, It wasn't like Oni was going to do much anyway. Let's be honest, it's an overtime game if those suck. My rating of this matchup, where life is supposed to counter myth, is a safe victory, or roughly 95 wins out of 100 for the life. Myth can still attempt to win by somehow keeping a Doom up, miraculously keeping a Fuel on, and then just sending 3 Ninja Pigs in Shrike and under Reliquary. Because I promise, team, you are not getting a Gambit off. And finally, the singular most one-sided and least winnable matchup in the entire game is life versus fire. This is sort of a best school versus worst school type situation, so you know how it is. The only thing differentiating this matchup from life v myth is the fact that myth can kind of keep up pressure with Divum and Cyclops spam, while fire is mostly left without any options. The best you can really hope for is pulling all your fuels at Beetles, using Betrayal on their Tri-Shields, getting a bubble up, casting Furnace, striking, and sending a Jin. Problem with that is, a good life wizard will just Centaur twice and send an Oni with a 40 blade to do most of your health, so you know how that goes. My rating in this matchup, where life is supposed to counter fire, is a safe victory, or 95 plus wins out of 100 for the life. You could have miraculous deck luck as a fire and win, but the game is pretty much just rigged against you in this matchup. But yep, that is going to wrap up the video. Some of these matchups, I mean, PvP right now it's kind of a mess. The new world of Wallaru that you saw in the background of this whole video is coming out soon, and it could just flip all of these rankings just on its head. I mean, you never know. When Wallaru drops, some of these matchups could drastically change. I'm expecting death versus life to become much more favorable for the death, and things like life versus fire, fire could, with flat res being gone, fire could definitely chip down life, especially with the regen nerf that's incoming as well. So yeah, that is going to wrap up. Hopefully the game gets better. I still love this guy in this world, and thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm, and I'll see y'all later.